Tantor Audio presents Murder in Malmö, the second Inspector Anita Sundstrom mystery by Torquil MacLeod. Narrated by Marguerite Gavin. Prologue. It was a fine, clear, tranquil evening, and there was nothing to hamper his line of fire. He could see the two women chatting animatedly. They waved their arms extravagantly as they spoke, to add emphasis to whatever they were discussing. Their actions were caught in the lights of the entrance to the drab block of apartments. The whole area was a sea of faceless, formless concrete. Unimaginative buildings filled with unwanted people. Rosengård wasn't a part of Malmö that he had been to before. It had taken him time to get his bearings, to get a feel for the urban terrain, his new war zone. And he was in enemy territory. These people weren't his people. They were invaders from foreign lands, intruders, like these two women in front of the apartment block who were now the center of his attention. He moved further behind the bush. No one else was around. He could hear snatches of music and voices coming from televisions because windows were open due to the warmth. He smelt the faint whiff of cigarette smoke from somewhere nearby, probably someone on a balcony, but he wasn't worried about being spotted. He could deal with any situation, and he had his favored large-caliber handgun, which gave him an automatic advantage. Now the women seemed to have come to the end of their conversation. They looked as though they were about to part. He raised his gun and lined up his targets. Each of the women was wearing a brightly colored hijab. Somehow it made it easier that he couldn't see their faces clearly. He would need to shoot quickly as he wanted to hit them both. His finger hovered gently over the trigger. He steadied himself. There was now a gap between the women. He tensed. 2 shots. The women silently slumped to the ground. There was a shout from a nearby window, but he didn't hear it. He was gone. Chapter 1. The mirror caught Tommy Ekman's self-satisfied smile. The brilliant white teeth between open lips were the most obvious sign, but it was the sparkle in the cool blue eyes that really reflected the inner delight. Despite it being 7 in the morning, his eyes weren't fogged up with sleep. He had been lying awake for the last half-hour. He had been thinking about her, not his wife Christina, who was staying over at her father's country place near Ilstorp, but Elin. He took out his toothbrush and squeezed on some toothpaste. Must keep those teeth looking dazzling. The smile again. Yes, he had made love to Elin at last. Over his office desk. He had been trying to engineer the opportunity ever since he had employed her as an account executive 6 months before. She had rebuffed his advances for a while. "We're both married," had been her defense strategy. He started to brush his teeth vigorously without ever losing sight of himself in the mirror. But last night he had breached her fortifications. His advertising agency had won that important pitch. Elin had led the successful team. They had broken out the champagne in his office. Others had slipped away over the next hour or so until they were the only ones left. Elin was a little high on her first big success with the agency. From then on, it hadn't been that difficult to get into her knickers. Even he had been surprised at how easily she had succumbed. He would give her the raise he had pantingly promised her shortly before he had maneuvered her onto his desk, but only as long as she was happy to provide extracurricular services to the boss. Tommy rinsed out his mouth. He would still have to be careful with Christina. He wouldn't want her to find out. Her money was still useful, and her father's business contacts. He didn't want to rock the domestic boat, though he found it harder to make love to Christina these days, despite the fact that she was still an attractive woman. Maybe it was familiarity that had led to boredom on his part, or perhaps because she hadn't been as interested in the physical side of their relationship since the kids arrived. But the business was doing well, despite all the economic doom-mongers. Still, he didn't want her to take him to the cleaners. Christina's father had been useful with the group, too. Given him a foot up, now he had cemented his place with his strategy ideas. They'd gone down very well. One of the suggestions had been acted upon within a week, and the film had been a real success. He was confident that he would be running the show very soon. Then the group would make people sit up. On this beautiful sunny May morning, life couldn't get any better. He slipped off his pajama bottoms and admired his naked figure in the mirror. He was still finely toned, despite all the client business lunches. And he still had stamina. Just ask Elin. Once aroused, she had been very accommodating. He was still laughing to himself when he stepped into the spacious wet room cubicle, closed the door, and flipped on the shower. It sprang into life, and he tilted his head upward and enjoyed the hard spray of hot, refreshing water hitting his face. It was invigorating. As he soaked his body, his mind began to wander again. Back to Elin. It had been so exciting, a triumphant moment of conquest. He could feel the first stiffening in his groin. It was only as he put the soap back in its cradle that he became aware of a strange tingling in his throat. He looked down at the silver circular outflow cover on the floor beneath his feet. The water was running out as usual, but something didn't seem quite right. His head began to swim and he started to feel giddy. His eyes were misting over. Tommy flapped at the shower tap and the water stopped flowing almost immediately, except for a few final drops. He swayed in the cubicle, not sure whether he would be able to keep on his feet. What the hell was happening to him? With great difficulty, he managed to slide the cubicle doors apart. In front of him, the bathroom was a blurred vision of dancing pale green and blue tiles. He stumbled out of the cubicle, still dripping wet. He tried to steady himself against the wash hand basin, but his grasping fingers missed the edge and he sank to his knees as he retched up some dribbled green saliva and the remnants of last night's champagne. Why was his skin so itchy? Frantically he ripped at his arms and chest with his nails. With a huge effort, he half staggered to his feet and fell forward towards the door of the bedroom. He didn't make it, and he sprawled on the bathroom floor. He tried to call out for help, not that there was anybody in the apartment to hear him at that time in the morning, but all that came out of his mouth was a fresh burst of vomit. The dizziness was sickening. He couldn't fight it any longer. Why was this happening? His throat, his skin, his eyes, his head were all on fire. He lay in a heap on the floor. He could feel himself slipping into a void of unconsciousness. His limbs, totally independent of his fast evaporating will, gave a last defiant jerk. Rays of early morning sunshine speared through the frosted glass of the bathroom window like a prism and bathed the dead body of Tommy Ekman in a brilliant light show. Below the bulging eyes, his mouth was wide open, frozen in the moment, in the cry for help that never came out. The sunlight made his teeth sparkle. Chapter 2. Michaela Lindgren yawned. She didn't know why, because she had slept soundly all night. Normally, when Jorgen was away on business, she would fret the night away, even though she knew he would be fine. Maybe it was insecurity. Now that the children had flown the nest, she had the house to herself, and that never felt quite right. During the day, she enjoyed the freedom. At night, it was different. Jorgen was always considerate and phoned from wherever he was to make sure that she was all right. She always locked up carefully, but perhaps it was the size of the house that made her nervous. Lots of empty rooms. That's why when Jorgen wasn't there, she would have the radio on when she went to bed. Noise was reassuring. Often she went to sleep with it still playing, and would wake up in a fright because she could hear voices. Come daylight, all the fears would disappear, like the early morning mist outside their seaside home. It was going to be another lovely day, and Jorgen would be back tonight. His flight into Kastrup Airport was due in the late afternoon. Michaela wandered into the kitchen and fixed herself a coffee, nice and strong, the perfect lift for the day. She missed having to make breakfast for the children. She had enjoyed the routine of fussing over them and making sure they had everything they needed for school that day. It gave her a role within the family. She was the organizer. Now there was very little to organize. Meals for Jorgen, accompanying him to the theatre, or one of his business functions. She had become a trophy wife without the requisite glamour. Home was her province. The other wives in their circle were far more sophisticated. They were up with the latest fashions, knew the names of the trendiest interior designers and chefs, and could drop into any conversation the expensively exotic locations where they had been on holiday, without the slightest hint of humility. Jorgen could afford to take her to anywhere she wanted, but she was a home bird, and he travelled so widely in his work that she was content to stay in Sweden. So they usually went to the island of Öland, or even closer to home in Österlen, which wasn't much more than an hour's drive from Limhamn. After another coffee and a light breakfast, she wanted to save herself for the special meal she was cooking to welcome Jorgen back. Michaela wandered down the corridor to the front door where she picked up the morning newspaper. She would have a quick read of it before heading off to the shops. She walked into the living room. The curtains were drawn. As she opened them, a weak sun was trying to penetrate the sea mist. Soon it would burn off, and it would be a lovely day. Then the wonderful sleek lines of the Øresund Bridge, the link between Sweden and Denmark, would emerge. It was as she turned from the window that she instantly knew something was wrong. For a moment she couldn't put her finger on it, as she stared at the opposite wall. She suddenly found herself gasping for air. It couldn't be. She steadied herself against the table. She looked again. There was no denying it. What was Jorgen going to say? She was now feeling faint. However hard she stared, it wasn't going to bring it back. It had definitely been there when she went to bed last night. This morning, it was gone. Chapter 3. I shot the wrong man. That's why I'm here, isn't it?
I wouldn't put it as brutally as that,
he said quietly. Inspector Anita Sundstrom absently patted down her short blonde hair before adjusting her glasses slightly as she stared hard at the young psychologist with the goatee beard and long wavy black hair. Why did everyone look so young these days? After recent events, Anita was feeling every one of her 42 years. Was she weighed down with self-reproach over her actions, or was she feeling guilty because she needed therapy? Certainly her employers, the Skåne County Police, thought she required help, or was it just that it would make them look better after the fiasco over the case of the murdered film star, Malin Lovgren? She had got their man, but only after she had shot the star's innocent husband, Mick Roslin, on the top of Malmö's iconic turning torso tower.
Take me through the events again, Anita.
Anita sighed and glanced towards the window. It was sunny out there. Swedes should be outdoors when the weather was like this, not stuck in a featureless hospital office, telling some child with a psychology degree the same story for the umpteenth time. Like most of her fellow countrymen, she accepted therapy as a necessary adjunct to modern-day life. She had had some sessions when trying to come to terms with her father's tragic death some years before. That had been her decision. This time it was different. It was beyond her control. She was being forced into it. She felt that, in her own way, she was coping well enough with the consequences of her recent actions. Maybe the problem was that she knew she would have to touch upon matters that were too sensitive to discuss, even in the cosy confessional of a psychologist's consulting room. I became convinced that Malin Lovgren's husband had killed her. I had established that he was having an affair, and he seemed to be pinning the blame on someone else. Anita realized that she was looking at her hands twisting on her lap. She knew she was avoiding eye contact. And this someone else? Dr. Axelson gently prodded. He was an old university friend of Rosalind's from England. Well, they had been friends until they fell out over a young female student. It was only this year that they'd met up again. The friend was a journalist, and he came over to Malmö to interview Rosalind because he'd become a famous film director over here. Rosalind tried to throw him off the top of the turning torso. The only way I could stop him. Her thoughts flashed back to that moment on a bitterly cold February day when she had rushed to the top of Scandinavia's tallest building and found the two men fighting. Rosalind just about to heave his one-time friend over the edge to plunge to a certain death. She had been too far away to physically break them up. She had called out, but Rosalind had ignored her. She had had to make a split-second decision. Her pistol was the only way she could save. She had never shot anyone before. The thought still made her tremble. I only realized later that Rosalind had worked out that his friend had murdered his wife.
Why do you not refer to the journalist by name?
Why? Because she didn't want to go there. This was the part that she still had difficulty getting her head around. She'd accepted the problems her actions had caused when the truth came out. 1 minute lauded as the cop who had solved Sweden's most recent high-profile murder, the next bringing in the real killer shortly after all the public plaudits had been dished out. The department had looked so stupid. Incompetent had been one of the lesser accusations tossed about in the press. Gun-happy cop shoots star's innocent husband had caused the Skåne County Police particular angst. As always, they had pretended to close ranks in public, but behind the scenes the blame game had kicked off almost at once. She had been suspended immediately, and as part of her rehabilitation she was now sitting in Dr. Axelson's office. All the details had been leaked to the press, although her name had been withheld. The papers had quickly put 2 and 2 together and had realized it must be her. It was important that the public knew that there was a scapegoat. The fact that she had brought in the real killer was now totally overlooked, as was her intervention at the top of the tower, which had stopped Rosalind committing murder himself. "Ewan," she said quietly. "Ewan Strachan. That was his name." Axelson tapped his pencil thoughtfully against his pursed lips. It was a habit that was beginning to irritate Anita. That is his name." Axelson smiled to himself.
"So, how did you discover that Ewan was the real murderer?"
It sounded just as ridiculous as it did when she told her story to her immediate boss, Chief Inspector Mowbray. He couldn't believe it any more than she could when Strachan had confessed. "He just told me."
"Just told you?"
Axelson asked quizzically. "Yes." Ewan had admitted it as he sat opposite her in a restaurant. He had let slip a piece of information that had made her suddenly realize that he was the guilty party. When she had challenged him, he had admitted, without a murmur of protest, carrying out the crime. And, furthermore, he had also put his hand up to the killing of the girl in Durham who had come between himself and Rosalind 25 years earlier. Anita wasn't sure why she hadn't mentioned that part of his confession to Mowbray. The next few hours had been like a dream. Ewan had meekly allowed her to take him to the policehouse, where she had officially charged him with the murder of Malin Lovgren. She was still wearing her one decent evening dress. That had become a running joke among many of her colleagues. As a result, she felt some relief that she had not been allowed to spend much time at police headquarters in the last few months.
"So why do you think he was so compliant?"
The question gave Anita a jolt. It was one that, fortunately, Mowbray, or in fact anybody else connected to the case, hadn't bothered to ask. She didn't want to reply, but Axelson's eyes were fixed steadily upon her. He wanted an answer, and he would know if she was lying. He was in love with me."
"And what about you?"
"What do you mean?"
she said defensively. "What did you feel about him?"
She glanced towards the window. The sun still shone, but there was no help in that direction. Since that night, she hadn't even admitted to herself her feelings for Ewan. "I was falling in love with him. I suppose I—" Axelson made a note on his pad.
"Do you still love him?"
"He's in prison."
"That's not an answer, Anita."
No, it wasn't. She didn't want to confront her feelings, not in front of this young man. All she wanted to do was get out of his room, run back to Simri-san, and walk along her favourite beach by herself, and forget about the police, psychologists, and the people who complicated her life.
"Do you still love him?"
he repeated gently. Very slowly, Anita nodded. Axelson snapped his notebook shut.
"Now we're getting somewhere."
Chapter 4. The light from the bedroom was momentarily blotted out. Chief Inspector Eric Mowberry's giant frame filled the doorway. He wasn't much shy of 2 meters tall, and carried an unhealthy amount of bulk around with him. It was many a year since he'd been able to slip into size 54 trousers. The most disconcerting aspect of his appearance was the strange colour of his dyed hair, which could best be described as nicotine yellow. Beneath it, all the features of his face were exaggerated by their mass, from the heavy jowls to the increasingly slitting eyes, caused by the collision of drooping eyebrows and puffed-up cheeks. He moved forward into the bathroom and towered above the body. With Mowberry inside, the room seemed a lot smaller than it had before. Quite a crowd now, with senior forensic technician Eva Thulin bending over the corpse, Inspector Henrik Nordland examining the shower cubicle, and Inspector Carl Westermark, with a wooden toothpick sticking out of the side of his mouth as a substitute cigarette, leaning casually against the basin. All three had on plastic suits.
"Well," Mowberry boomed, "what the hell happened here?"
Westermark took the toothpick out of his mouth.
"He's called Tommy Ekman, runs an advertising agency in town. Cleaning lady found him." "How did he die?"
This time Mowberry addressed Thulin. Eva glanced up. Somehow he seems to have been gassed, or certainly the physical signs point in that direction.
Mowberry snorted. "How do you gas someone in a shower?"
"I have no idea yet," said Thulin, rising from her haunches.
"Okay, is there a Fru Ekman, or is he a gay bachelor?" "There is, and a couple of kids, too."
Westermark twirled the toothpick round his fingers. His cropped blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and lantern-jawed ruggedness gave him the good looks that he assumed no woman could resist. Not many had.
"They're in the country at the moment. And the cleaning lady? She's in the kitchen with the constable,"
explained Nordland.
"In a state of shock. Swedish isn't that good. Bosnian, I think. Bloody typical,"
snarled Westermark. Mowberry ignored Westermark and shook his head.
"But gassing—"
"I may be able to tell you once I've examined the whole scene," said Thulin in some exasperation. "So if you gentlemen would like to leave, until then, your gas is as good as mine." Even Mowberry managed to raise a faint smile. Anita drove out of the hospital car park. Were the Axelson sessions doing any good? Only time would tell. What was inescapable was the fact that she would be returning to work tomorrow. It made her feel nervous. How would she be received by her colleagues? Sympathetically? Resentfully? Mockingly? Anita turned the car into the stream of traffic. Chief Inspector Eric Mowberry would probably treat her with his usual suspicion. He was uncomfortable with the female detective on his team. He didn't like anyone standing up to him, particularly a woman. And just when she thought she had won him over with her discovery that Mick Roslin had murdered his wife, it was all blown away by the revelation that Ewan Strachan had been the killer all along. Henrik Nordland, the oldest member of the team and her unofficial mentor, would provide the sympathy and a shoulder to cry on, if necessary. A widower nearing retirement, Nordland had already taken the time to come round to her apartment in Roskildewagen to talk to her. But her real worry was Carl Westermark. In his late 30s, this coldly handsome man was a danger. She knew that he both loathed her and lusted after her. He had made both emotions perfectly plain. He was ruthless, and she knew he would have exploited her fall from grace whilst she was on leave of absence from the policehouse. Westermarck had believed Strachan to be guilty all along, and felt that she had been protecting the British journalist because he could see, even when she hadn't initially, that she was falling for him. This had infuriated Westermarck because she was one of the few women he had failed to add to his impressive list of conquests. Her pointed rejections of his obvious advances had only increased his hatred of her whilst heightening the sexual tension and desire. It was a volatile combination that would only strain the atmosphere within the team on her return. Anita now found herself at a standstill. The traffic was going nowhere. It was unusual to have a jam at this time of day. This was annoying. She only lived across the park, but had taken the car as she wanted to do some shopping at Mobilia after her hospital appointment. Now that she was stuck, she just wanted to get back home, put on her running clothes and jog away her worries in Pildammsparken. Living in Malmö meant she hadn't a quiet space to run or walk along. In the summer, too many people came out to enjoy the sun on the city beaches. She had managed to escape to Simrishamn during her suspension, staying with her old school friend Sandra. There, she had been able to wander by herself up towards Baskemella and on to her favourite beach, Lilavik. It was her mental sanctuary. Out of season, there would be just her on her own, the clean, shining sand, and the Baltic stretching away to the horizon. Anita looked around to see if there was another way out. The car was trapped. She smacked the steering wheel in frustration. The sun was now beating down, and her old Volkswagen was getting decidedly stuffy, despite the open window. Like some of the other drivers, she got out to see what was holding them up. Further along the street, she could see a large group of bystanders. She also spotted a couple of uniformed policemen. She slammed the car door shut and walked towards the crowd. On reaching the group, she recognized one of the officers, Carl van Beria. Her attempts to attract his attention were drowned out by the blaring of an ambulance siren. The ambulance wove its way through the traffic until it stopped in the middle of the street. "Carl." The officer turned and looked at Anita in some surprise. Once he recognized her, was that a smirk he was trying to hide? Or am I being paranoid? Thought Anita. "What's up?" Svanbergia pointed through the throng.
"Someone's been knocked over. Probably wasn't looking when crossing the street."
"Can I help?" For a moment she could see the confusion on his face. Like everyone based at the police house, he would know her situation and be aware of its aftermath.
"I thought you—"
"I start tomorrow. Any development on the Rosengård shootings?" The press had lost interest when it became clear that both immigrant women would survive. She hoped the police attitude hadn't been the same.
"No."
Fortunately, Svanbergia was saved by his colleague calling to him. The paramedics were dealing with what Anita could now see was a man lying on the ground. He was soon lost to view, and as she walked back to her car, the ambulance sirens started up again. Chapter 5. Chief Inspector Moberry stared out of his office window over the canal that encircles the old centre of Malmö. The sun glinted on the calm water. It didn't reflect his disposition at that moment. He was irritated, and he was hungry. The two weren't mutually exclusive. It took a lot to satisfy his appetite. He knew he ate and drank too much, but it was more out of habit these days. He had long given up on the idea of diets and controlling his weight. He had always been big. Now he was gross. He realized that colleagues must make comments behind his back, though his temper ensured that no one would dare make derogatory remarks to his face. He hadn't eaten properly because he had been called out to the Ekman case. It had been bedlam since, and he hadn't had time for even a sandwich. On returning to the police house, he acquainted Dahlbeck, the commissioner of the Skåne County Police, with the facts. Then he had had a first briefing session with the team. They were as nonplussed as he had been, a respectable businessman possibly gassed in his own shower. The commissioner thought Moberry had been winding him up at first. By the time he appreciated the fact that the crime was for real, he had made it clear.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?